How to get good at small talk and even enjoy it. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You go to a networking event, you see a sea of people there. You don't know anyone, you don't even know where to start. Maybe you bump into someone and say, "Hey, how's it going?" And they say, "Yeah, good. You?" "Yeah, great. What do you do?" "I'm an accountant." "Oh, that's great. I am looking for a job." "Oh, that's good." And then it starts to get awkward. Because I know it's going to be awkward, I never even tried to make small talk. We all know we have to do it, but we just don't know how. But today I'm going to share with you what I've learned that's not only made me better at small talk, but I actually enjoy it. Now here's what I used to do in a small talk situation. Let's say I'm in a meeting and I have someone I'm talking to in the meeting, but we're waiting for the meeting to start and I have to engage them in conversation. My mind would be running at 1,000,000 miles an hour thinking, "Hey, what can you say to get the conversation going? Because the silence is really awkward. You have to say something." I'd say something like, "Wow, it's getting cold today, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is much colder than usual." "Yeah, very, very cold. In other cities, it's not that cold right now." "Yeah, isn't that crazy? Some cities are warm, some are cold." "Yeah, this explains why I didn't get too many dates in college." But here's what was happening in my mind. I was constantly thinking of the next thing to say to toss the conversation back at the other person. And while they're talking, I'm thinking, okay, what else can I ask them? What else can I ask them? I just want them to continue talking so I feel at ease that I don't have to do the lifting. But then the issue is I'm never present in the conversation. I'm always afraid I'm going to run out of topics and there's going to be this awkward lull in the conversation and I'm going to feel stupid. So here's the first thing I learned to do. I read an amazing book called Never Split the Difference. And in that book, Chris talks about the importance of using questions that start with a what or a how. What brought you here? What got you into accounting? When you ask questions, the answer to this is going to be a story. Now, stories don't require people to come up with things to say. They usually know the story already. So if I ask you right now, "Hey, what did you do since you woke up and you came to watch this video?" You can tell me a mini story of all of the events, all of the things that you did in the middle, and you don't really have to recall them because you know. And at the same time, as you're telling me a story, is giving me a lot of pieces of information to work with that I can then ask you further questions about. So let's see the difference in these techniques real quick. Here's how not to do it. "Hey, what do you do for a living?" "I'm an accountant." "What kind of accountant?" "A tax accountant." "Do you do a lot of taxes?" "That's all I do." "Okay, and how has the tax been?" "Yeah, it's been all right, I guess." Can you see how weird that vibe is? Sounds like an interrogation. It sounds very, very forced. No one really cares about each other. But what if I shift to asking questions that are more story-oriented, the ones that start with what and how? "Hey, what got you into accounting?" "Well, to be honest, growing up, I was never good at accounting. I was never good at math, but my dad was an accountant, and just being around him, working at his firm, it showed me how rewarding the work can be, so I decided, okay, let me try it." Oh, that's interesting. So it sounds like you were already around someone who knew their craft, but what made you switch? Because you said you weren't initially interested, but then being around your dad, it made you more interested. Yeah, that's a good question. We had a few clients and they had these really interesting businesses. And the more I worked with them, the more I realized, wow, I want to learn more about how they operate internally when it comes to the numbers, how do they budget? And that was very interesting. And the more I did it, the more interesting it got. Can you see how that's a much better conversation? Because when two people are connecting, they don't connect through facts and figures. What do you do? Why are you here? How long have you been doing this? These facts, they don't really do anything to establish an emotional connection. But when you share stories, now there's comfort being built. Now there's trust being built. The other benefit of this is you don't constantly need to come up with things to say. Because if I ask him, how did you get into accounting? He's going to give me a long answer with a lot of pieces of information in it that I can then sit with and say, you mentioned XYZ, and then I can create another thread of conversation from that. So here's a quick format you can follow. You ask someone a question that starts with a what or a how. And by the way, the reason you might not want to start with why questions is because sometimes it can come across as accusatory. Why did you get into accounting? Why did you leave your last job? See what I'm saying? After asking the question, you wait for them to respond. Once they respond, to show them that you've been listening, you paraphrase or you repeat what you've heard. Oh, that's interesting. So I heard you say XYZ. This shows the other person that you have been listening, and it also reminds you of what they just said, because we're so stuck in our brain, we don't even know what's happening. Then you can give input from your life or your experience, or you can ask another question. It reminds me of when I was doing this back in the day. So when you find that ABC is happening, do you also do XYZ? And you can just keep the conversation going like that. And eventually, when someone's talking about themselves, they'll ask you the same questions. What about you? What got you into the field you're in? This is the importance of storytelling in conversation. If you can learn to do this, you will never have to carry the burden of a conversation. Now, the opposite is also true. When someone is talking to you, what you don't want to do is give them very little information to work off of. So for example, so what do you do for a living? I'm a UX designer for a Web3 company. UX designer, Web3. Okay, yeah, that sounds interesting. When we define ourselves with specific titles and when we give information that other people can't really bounce off of, the conversation will die off. So instead, find a way to tell a story about your answer. Hey, what do you do for a living? I'm a UX designer. So you know how you go on some websites and they're laid out so well and so thoughtfully where it makes it easy for you to know where things are, where you can buy the product, where you can buy the service. I'm the one who designs that webpage and I've been doing it for quite a while and love the work. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that much work went into just designing a website. Do you have to learn how to code and everything for that as well? Can you see how it gives the other person a prompt to ask further questions? So a lot of times when we're in a conversation, we don't give the other person enough information. We give them one stream of information, one small phrase, and they can't really do anything with it. I remember I used to feel like I have to stick to one topic at all times, but you don't have to stick to one topic. You can bounce around several different topics because if the person is not interested in talking about one thing and you talk about 4 other things, eventually they'll find something that they have an interest in or they have an expertise in, and now you have commonality in conversation. Now, I'm sure you have some thoughts like, I don't want to start this conversation with this person because I won't know what to say next. For me, I was so hesitant on talking to someone at a networking event because I didn't know what the entire conversation would look like. I would literally map it out in my head. Okay, I'm going to say hi. They will say hi back. Then I'm going to ask this question. They will say this, then this, then this. And I'm trying to map the entire thing out. And usually because I don't know how the conversation will go, I don't even start the conversation. I go to an event, I talk to no one, I go back home, and I regret the whole experience. But here's something I learned from a friend of mine who was just unbelievable at this. He had a rule called the 20 hellos, and it blew the back of my mind the moment I heard it. I once went to a networking event with him, and I'm usually very scared of these events. And the moment we entered the event, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go in the corner, grab some food, grab some drinks, then I'm going to walk around, see who I know, who I can talk to. Before I can even do any of that, my friend just goes to the first person he sees and says, hello, my name is this, and starts talking to them, starts talking to the other person, starts talking to the other person. And I'm seeing him bounce around like a pinball around the entire event. People are following him. He looks like a celebrity. He has this entire posse in the matter of 5 minutes. And I'm wondering, do you know these people? What is happening? And he has this aura where everyone's following him around. He's the leader in that event. I just couldn't understand what's happening. So I asked him, hey man, how did you do this? What is the technique? You have no anxiety in these situations. He says, when I enter a room and if I start thinking about what I'm going to say, who I'm going to talk to, I know I'm not going to talk to anyone. So my goal is the moment I enter, I'm going to say the word hello to 20 people. I don't care what happens after that. I don't care what they say after that. I just want to say 20 hellos. What that does is it starts to build momentum. I'm really afraid of the first hello, but then I'll realize most people are friendly and they want you to talk to them. Then I'll introduce them to other people. I'll say, hey, how's it going? I just met this person. Why don't you meet them? And the next thing you know, I've got an entire posse around the event. And all it takes is 20 hellos, because by the time you get to 20, first of all, you've forgotten that was your assignment, but you've built up all this momentum of talking to so many people. You start feeling a lot more confident. You start becoming a lot more social, and other people see you taking the initiative. They feel more recognized and seen because you're going out of your way and saying hello to people. But also they see you as a leader, the one who's initiating, the one who's helping people collaborate in that setting. So I tried that the next time I went to a networking event. I just entered the first person I saw. I said, hey, I'm Yasser. I just got here. That's literally what I said. Hey, my name is Yasser. I just got here. He said, hey, Yasser, I just got here too. What brought you here? Asking me a story. Then we started talking. Then I started talking to someone else. And the next thing we know, we've got 10, 15 people in the group. So this can be a very, very enjoyable experience when you start to learn to take the initiative, when you start to learn how your mind works in these situations. And you just need a simple tool, a simple prompt to get you started. A prompt as simple as, hey, my name is this. I just got here. Now they have context. They're not confused about who you are while you're talking to them. That leads me to my next point. Sometimes small talk is hard because you don't have context or relevance to the situation. Now, what does that mean? Let's say you're standing at a bus stop and someone comes up to you and said, hey, how about that game last night, right? What game? Yeah, they scored 5-1. Ridiculous. Unbelievable. You talking to me? Yeah, I'm talking to you. And by the way, what time does the bus get here? I don't know, should be here any second. The entire time I'm skeptical. I'm wondering, why is this person talking to me? Why are they questioning me? What do they want? Why are they here? Because I don't know their relevance to me. But instead, if they said, hey, excuse me, I'm just waiting for the bus. I'm wondering, do you know when the bus is arriving? Yeah, it should be here in about 10 minutes. Now you know the relevance of the conversation. Now you know what they want from you. You're not wondering, thinking, what is happening? So sometimes in a small talk situation, people are afraid because they don't know the context. They don't know what is happening. So the sooner you can explain what is happening, the easier it is for them to become comfortable with you, become comfortable and develop trust with you. There's a great book called Persuasion, which talks about how when you just give people a reason of why you're doing something, that alone is much more powerful than not giving them a reason. And it doesn't even matter what the reason is. So look for ways to establish relevance and context with the person you're speaking to, and there's going to be a lot more trust there. Now, this next thing took me forever to learn, but it is to lower the threshold of success. I used to think if I'm getting in a small talk situation, I have to be the most interesting person in the world. I have to tell the most amazing stories. They have to laugh at everything I say. They have to want to be my best friend, and we have to get married by the end of it. But that puts so much pressure on the conversation where I can't even enjoy it. So lower the threshold. What part of small talk do you struggle with? For me, I couldn't even start a conversation with someone. So my success threshold was I just have to say hello to one person today. Usually I'll say hello to one person, then that becomes 2, that becomes 3, that becomes 4, and suddenly I'm talking to everybody. Now let's say you can say hello to everybody, but you don't know how to keep the conversation going with them. Now your goal is to ask them what and how questions and to get them to tell you stories about themselves. Now you can start the conversation, you can get them to start talking, and you can keep the conversation going. But maybe you don't know how to end the conversation. It ends abruptly and then you just have to make an excuse to leave. Now you can figure out, hey, what's a good way to leave the conversation if I'm not connecting with this person? So you learn step by step. You don't have to learn the entire thing. That being said, you also have to recognize cues when someone is not interested. Sometimes we feel the need to make conversation with someone when we don't really have to, and other people don't really want to talk, and that's okay. So if you're talking to someone, hey, how's it going? And they give you one-word answers, yeah, it's going good. They're not making eye contact, they're looking around, their feet are pointed away from you. The amount of information you're sharing is far more than what they're sharing. Usually it could mean they're not interested in the conversation. But if they're asking you questions, if they're interested in learning more about you, that's an indication you should consider continuing the conversation. And let's face it, most people are not very good at small talk. So even if they want to talk to you, maybe they don't know how. Maybe they're thinking of the same thing you're thinking of. How do I talk to this person more? How do I get them to keep talking? I don't have any questions to ask, and they're stuck in their head. So this is why at the beginning of the conversation, it's helpful if you take on the burden of the conversation. You share something about yourself so it allows them to ask you questions. If you ask them, hey, what do you do for a living? And they give you a one-word answer, you can try showing an interest in what they've just said to get them to open up. Because most people, they're a little shelled up at the start. They don't want to open up right away. They're not going to go into stories right away. You might have to hold up the burden of the conversation yourself, share some information about yourself, then get them to talk. So a conversation does take time, but the more trust that is built, the easier it tends to get. When you start a conversation, don't ask them to invest heavily. You first invest in them. If someone showed up to you and said, hey, what's your name? Yasser. What brought you here? I'm here for the event. Okay, what do you like about the event so far? Like, who are you? Why are you talking to me? But if instead they came up to you and they introduced themselves first. Hey, my name is Yasser. I just got here to the event. I wanted to meet some people. How's it going? Hey, Yasser, my name is Ali. How are you doing? So just that little bit of information that I gave up front about myself makes it easier for them to have a conversation with me. Now, how do you end the conversation? This is also one of the most painful parts because it usually just dies off awkwardly and then you're wondering, oh, I don't want that to happen again. I'd rather not get into a conversation at all. So here are 2 things that I like to do. 1, I use the phrase before I go. This indicates that the conversation is coming to an end. You don't want to abruptly say, well, that was great. I'll see you later. That sounds a little weird. Before I go talk to that person over there, you did mention you were using a travel agency to travel. Which travel agency was that again? Now they're getting an indication that the conversation is winding down. They can prepare themselves too. It's not going to be abrupt. So when I'm transitioning into closing the conversation, I'll just say before I go, and that way they know the conversation is coming to a close. Now I used to say things like, I'm going to go to the bathroom, I'm going to go grab some food. And I realized I just don't have to lie about it. Whatever I'm doing next, I just tell them that's what I'm going to do. Now, one last thing I want to mention, and this one took me the longest to realize. When I came to Canada, I felt I couldn't really fit into a conversation. People would talk about things that I just had no knowledge about. They would talk about hockey, they would talk about baseball, they would talk about politics, and I'm just wondering, what is going on? I don't know how to contribute. So I would ask questions when I was really not interested in any of the topics. I didn't really care, but I wanted to be a part of the conversation. And it took took me far too many years to realize that I don't always have to say something. I don't always have to be in a conversation. I can be completely comfortable just listening to the conversation or just acknowledging, hey, this is not my fit. This is not the space for me to connect with people, and that's okay. And I'll give you a really weird example. I once went to a meditation class. It was a beginner's meditation class, and I thought it was going to be amazing. I'll show up there, meet some other people. I showed up there, and I was the only man in the entire event, and everyone else was a pregnant woman. And I realized I read the sign wrong. It was beginner's meditation for mothers, and I realized, oh my God, what am I doing here? So of course, all of the questions that are being asked are about motherhood. They're about how do you balance stress levels as a new mom. And I'm just thinking, should I ask a question about what it's like to be a mom? No, that would be strange, right? So I just recognized that's not a place for me. That's just not the setting I should be in. I don't have to pretend to be interested because then it's going to come across inauthentic. Now, applying all of these tips, I've gone from being extremely socially anxious to now being able to do small talk on the fly, and I don't really have a lot of trouble with it, and I enjoy it. So remember to initiate the conversation yourself, take on the burden of the conversation when you first start, ask what and how questions to keep the conversation going, to establish some trust with stories being shared. When you have to end the conversation, just say, hey, before I go, and then end the conversation. And remember, you don't have to be in a conversation. You don't have to pretend to be in a conversation if you're not interested in the topic. Now, if you want to learn how to be a more articulate speaker, how to speak in a way where people see you as a credible person, go watch this video next.